My parents stole my $68,000 inheritance to fund my sister's dreams while treating me like I didn't exist, so I built my own empire. And what I revealed about their perfect family destroyed everything. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Growing up, I always knew I was the spare tire in the Jennings family garage. My parents, John and Linda Jennings, had Tina firstborn deaf, requiring constant attention, endless specialists, and mountains of love I watched from the sidelines. When I arrived 2 years later, I became the kid who could fend for himself while they navigated Tina's world of sign language lessons, audio gest appointments, and special education meetings. Don't get me wrong, I never resented Tina. She didn't ask to be born deaf, and she certainly didn't ask our parents to use her condition as an excuse to forget they had another child. But by age 12, I'd learned to make my own breakfast, walk myself to school, and celebrate my birthday with a gas station cupcake because my parents were at another appointment across town. The only person who seemed to remember I existed was my grandfather, Robert Jennings. Every summer, I'd spend 3 weeks at his farm in Nebraska, learning to fix tractors and listening to his stories about building his construction business from nothing. He'd ruffle my hair and say, "Cody, you've got that Jennings determination. Don't let anyone convince you that being overlooked means being worthless." When Grandpa died during my senior year of high school, I felt like I'd lost my only real advocate. The funeral was a blur of relatives I barely knew, but I remember sitting in the lawyer's office afterward, shocked to learn that Grandpa had left me $68,000 in a trust fund. The lawyer, Mr. Richardson, explained that the money would be released to me on my 21st birthday, with my parents as trustees until then. "Your grandfather wanted to make sure you had a foundation to build your dreams on," Mr. Richardson said, handing my father the paperwork. He was very specific that this money was for Cody's future college, starting a business, whatever path he chooses. My parents nodded solemnly, promising to guard the money carefully. I felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone had chosen me first. Fast forward 3 years, I'm 20, working nights at a warehouse while taking community college classes in computer programming during the day. My best friend Danny Myers and I have been developing a mobile game in our spare time, nothing fancy. Just a puzzle game we think has potential. We've scraped together enough money for basic development tools, but we need funds for proper artwork, marketing, and app store fees. That's when I remembered Grandpa's money. In 6 months, I'd turn 21 and have access to the inheritance. Danny and I started making plans we'd use part of the money to properly launch our game, maybe even start a small development company. I approached my parents about the timeline, expecting them to be supportive. Instead, I got nervous glances and vague promises to look into the paperwork. 2 weeks later, everything changed. I was coming home from work around midnight when I heard voices in the kitchen. Through the doorway, I saw my parents hunched over papers at the table, whispering urgently, "Told Tina we'd have it by her birthday." My mother was saying, "The art school deposit is due next month." "I know, Linda, but if Cody asks to see the account statements," my father replied. My blood went cold. I crept closer, staying hidden in the hallway. "He won't ask," my mother said firmly. "He's never shown interest in managing money. Besides, this is for Tina's future. She's got real talent, and the California Institute of Art Design is her dream school. Grandpa would have wanted us to use the money where it could do the most good." $68,000, my father sighed. "It'll cover her full tuition and living expenses for the first 2 years. By then, we can figure out how to handle Cody's questions." I stood there in the dark hallway, feeling like someone had punched all the air from my lungs. They were stealing my inheritance, not borrowing, stealing, and they'd convinced themselves it was the right thing to do. I backed away silently and climbed the stairs to my room, mind racing. I needed proof. I needed to understand exactly what they'd done and how far this betrayal went. The next morning, I called Mr. Richardson's office, claiming I needed information about the trust fund for college financial aid paperwork. His secretary was helpful but couldn't give specific details over the phone. "You'll need to come in with your parents as co-trustees," she explained, "or you can wait until your 21st birthday when the trust transfers fully to your name that afternoon." I drove to the lawyer's office alone. Mr. Richardson was sympathetic but firm about the legal requirements. "I understand your concerns, Cody, but your parents are the appointed trustees. I can't discuss the trust details without their presence." He paused, studying my face. "Is there something specific you're worried about?" I hedged, not wanting to make accusations without proof. "I just want to make sure everything is in order for my birthday next year." Mr. Richardson's expression grew more serious. "Trust fund issues can be complex. If you have concerns about the management of your inheritance, you might want to consider consulting with an independent attorney." That evening, I started my real investigation. I knew my parents kept important papers in their bedroom office, but it was always locked. However, I'd watched my father work from home during sick days over the years and knew he was terrible with digital security. He used the same password for everything: TeenToff 2003, Tina's birth year. Late that night, I crept downstairs and tried their home computer. The password worked. My hands shook as I accessed their email and financial accounts. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The inheritance money was completely gone. Over the past 18 months, my parents had systematically transferred funds from the trust account to pay for Tina's private art classes, a professional portfolio photographer, application fees to multiple art colleges, and finally, a $30,000 deposit to the California Institute of Art Design. But the worst part was the email chain between my parents and Tina. She knew. Not only did she know the money was originally mine, but she'd actively participated in planning how to spend it. "Thanks so much for helping me get into Chide." One of Tina's emails read, "Cody will understand eventually. He's not really the college type anyway, and I'll pay him back someday when I'm a famous artist." My mother had replied, "Don't worry about Cody, sweetheart. Family looks out for family, and your talent deserves this opportunity. Grandpa loved you just as much as he loved Cody." I screenshot everything, created a secure backup, and returned to my room feeling like I was drowning. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd rewritten history to justify it, convincing themselves and Tina that this was somehow fair. I decided to confront them directly, believing that honesty might lead to honesty. I waited until the next evening when all 3 of them were home. then sat them down in the living room. I need to talk to you about Grandpa's trust fund, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My parents exchanged those looks again, while Tina suddenly became very interested in her phone. What about it? My father asked carefully. I know you used the money for Tina's art school, I said. I found the emails, the bank transfers, everything. My mother's face flushed red. You went through our private emails. That's a violation of trust, Cody. I violated trust. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You stole $68,000 that Grandpa specifically left for me. We didn't steal anything, my father said firmly. We made a family decision to invest that money where it would do the most good. Tina has a gift that deserves nurturing. You're practical. You'll find your own way. Tina finally looked up from her phone, signing as she spoke. Cody, I promise I'll pay you back when I start making money as an artist. This is just a loan I never agreed to. I stood up, anger finally overriding shock. That money was supposed to help me start my business, go to college, build a future. Grandpa left it specifically for me. Grandpa loved both of you equally, my mother said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I remembered from childhood lectures. He would have wanted us to use his gift to help the child who needed it most. So you decided I didn't need it? I asked. You're strong, Cody, my father said. You've always been independent. Tina needs more support because of her challenges. Her deafness isn't a challenge that requires my inheritance. I shouted and my mother gasped. How can you be so selfish? Your sister has overcome incredible obstacles to develop her artistic talent. The least you can do is support her dreams. I looked around the room at my family, my parents staring at me like I was a stranger. Tina, tears in her eyes but still clutching her phone with the art school acceptance letter. And I realized something fundamental. They genuinely believe they were the good guys in this story. I'm not supporting her dreams, I said quietly. I'm funding them with money that was specifically left to me. There's a difference. I walked out of the house that night and didn't come back for 3 days. I stayed with Danny, using the time to think and plan. When I finally returned home, my parents acted like the conversation had never happened. The message was clear, the topic was closed, their decision was final, and I was supposed to accept it and move on. That's when I realized I was completely alone in this fight. I decided to seek legal help, using money from my warehouse job. I consulted with an attorney specializing in trust and estate law. Sarah Martinez listened to my story and reviewed the screenshots I'd gathered. This is clearly a breach of fiduciary duty, she said. Your parents were legally obligated to manage that money for your benefit alone. However, pursuing this legally will be expensive and emotionally devastating for your family relationships. What would it cost? I asked. Probably $15,000 to $20,000, and that's if your parents don't fight back hard. If they hire their own attorney and drag this out, it could go much higher. I did the math. I was making $12 an hour at the warehouse, even working overtime. It would take me over a year just to afford the legal fees, and that was assuming I didn't need to eat or pay rent. There's another issue, Sarah continued. Your parents could claim they used the money for legitimate family expenses that benefited you indirectly. Courts sometimes view inheritance disputes within families as civil matters that should be resolved privately. What do you mean? If your parents argue that supporting Tina's education benefited the whole family's social status, or that they intended to repay the money, a judge might view this as a family disagreement rather than theft. I left her office feeling more defeated than ever. The legal system that should have protected my rights was too expensive for me to access, and even if I could afford it, victory wasn't guaranteed. That evening, I made one more attempt at resolution. I wrote my parents a formal letter outlining my legal position and requesting they voluntarily repay the money over time. I suggested they could take out a loan against their house equity and pay me back in installments. Their response came 2 days later, not in words but in action. They changed the locks on the house. When I came home from work, my key wouldn't fit. I knocked on the door, and my mother answered with tears in her eyes. We can't have someone in our home who's threatening legal action against his own family. She said, we've packed your things there in the garage. Just like that, I was homeless at 20 years old, with no inheritance, no legal recourse I could afford, and no family support. I'd lost everything trying to claim what was rightfully mine. Denny's family let me stay in their basement while I figured out my next move. His parents, Bill and Rita Myers, had known me since childhood, and were horrified by what my parents had done. That's theft, plain and simple, Bill said over dinner one night. I don't care if they're your parents. Maybe you should try talking to your extended family. Rita suggested. Surely someone else in the family would see how wrong this is. That gave me an idea. My father's sister, Aunt Susan Parker, had always been close to Grandpa. If anyone would understand his intentions with the inheritance, it would be her. I called Susan and arranged to meet her for coffee. She listened to my story with growing outrage. That money was specifically meant for you, Cody, she said firmly. I was there when Dad talked about updating his will. He was worried that you were being overlooked in the family, and wanted to make sure you had opportunities. Would you talk to them? I asked. Maybe if it comes from you, they'll listen. Susan agreed to try. She called a family meeting the following weekend, inviting my parents, my Uncle Mike and my grandmother on my mother's side. I wasn't invited, but Susan called me afterward with the results. I'm so sorry, Cody, she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. They've convinced themselves they did the right thing. Your mother actually said that supporting Tina's artistic career was more important than your hobby business with computers. What did everyone else say? Mike stayed out of it. He doesn't want to get involved in family drama. Your grandmother sided with your parents, saying that families should support the member who needs help most. My heart sank. So nobody thinks what they did was wrong. I do, Susan said firmly. But I'm just one voice, and I don't have any legal standing. I'm sorry, honey. I tried. The family meeting had backfired completely. Instead of creating pressure for my parents to return the money, it had given them additional validation for their decision. How they could point to family support as evidence that they'd done the right thing. Even worse, I learned through Susan that my parents were telling people I'd become bitter and greedy, and was trying to destroy the family over money. They were controlling the narrative. painting me as the villain for wanting my own inheritance. I was losing the war for hearts and minds, and I didn't have the resources to fight back effectively. That night, lying on Denny's basement couch, I had a realization that changed everything. I was fighting the wrong battle. Instead of trying to get my stolen money back, I needed to prove that I could succeed without it. Instead of begging my family to treat me fairly, I needed to build something so undeniably successful that their narrative about my hobby business would collapse. I wasn't going to waste any more energy trying to convince people who had already decided I didn't matter. I was going to make them irrelevant to my success. Danny and I doubled down on our game development. We worked every spare moment him handling programming while I focused on game design and business development. We couldn't afford professional artwork, so I reached out to local art students, offering them portfolio pieces in exchange for graphics work. That's how I met Kristen Moore, a graphic design student at the community college who was struggling to pay her tuition. She was talented, driven, and completely uninterested in family drama, perfect for our team. When I explained our revenue-sharing plan instead of upfront payment, she was intrigued enough to look at our game concept. "This is actually really good," she said after reviewing our prototype. "The puzzle mechanics are addictive, and the story elements give it emotional depth. With the right visual design, this could be commercially viable." We spent 3 months perfecting our first game, Echo Chamber, a puzzle adventure about a character searching for their voice in a world that keeps trying to silence them. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was personal. Launch day was terrifying. We'd invested everything we had in marketing and app store optimization. Danny had taken extra shifts at his retail job to fund Facebook ads. Kristen had designed beautiful promotional materials. And I'd cold called gaming journalists and YouTube reviewers for weeks. For the first 2 days, downloads were disappointing. We watched the numbers obsessively, each sale feeling like a small miracle. By day 3, we'd sold maybe 200 copies. Then something beautiful happened. Players started leaving reviews, not just good reviews, passionate reviews. People were connecting with the emotional core of the game in ways we'd never expected. "This game made me cry," one review read. "The story about fighting for your voice really resonated with my own family struggles." "Incredible puzzle design with real emotional depth," another said. "Can't wait for the sequel." By the end of the first week, we'd sold over 2,000 copies. By the end of the month, we'd hit 10,000 sales and were featured in the App Store's Games We Love section. Our first month's revenue was $12,000. After splitting it 3 ways and setting aside money for taxes in our next project, I made more in 4 weeks than I'd been making in 3 months at the warehouse. But more importantly, I'd proven something to myself: I could build success without my family's support or my grandfather's money. News of our game's success spread through our small town faster than I'd expected. The local newspaper ran a feature story about young entrepreneurs making it big in tech, and suddenly people who'd ignored me for years were treating me like someone worth knowing. The article included a photo of our team and mentioned that we were all local community college students who'd built the game with minimal resources and maximum determination. It was picked up by regional media, and within a few weeks, we were getting attention from indie game publications. Derek Hines, a former game developer who's moved to our area to teach at the local university, reached out after reading about us. He'd worked for major gaming companies before retiring and offered to mentor our growing business. "You've got something special here," he said during our first meeting, "but if you want to turn this into a real company, you need to think bigger. One successful game is great, building a sustainable business requires planning for the long term." Derek helped us formalize our partnership, incorporate as a proper business, and develop a roadmap for our next 3 games. More importantly, he introduced us to investors and industry contacts who could help us scale. Within 6 months of launching Echo Chamber, we'd secured enough funding to work on game development full-time. I quit the warehouse job and moved into a small apartment with Kristen, who'd become more than just a business partner. Our second game, Resonance, launched 8 months later and was an even bigger success. We'd learned from our first experience and built better systems for marketing, community engagement, and post-launch content. By my 22nd birthday, year after I should have received my inheritance, our company was generating over $100,000 in annual revenue, and we were being courted by major gaming publishers interested in acquisition discussions. I was succeeding beyond anything that $68,000 could have made possible. The theft had hurt me, but the drive to prove myself had pushed me further than I might have gone otherwise. Success has a way of changing how people see you, and nowhere was that more obvious than in my family's sudden renewed interest in my life. It started with a text from my mother: "Saw the article about your game company. Congratulations, would love to hear more about it." Then my father called, wanting to reconnect and hear about my business ventures. Even Tina reached out, signing in a video message that she was proud of her brother's success and hoped we could put the past behind us. I ignored them all, but they didn't give up. Susan called to tell me that my parents were devastated by our estrangement and wanted to make things right. Family friends started approaching me at the grocery store, mentioning how much my parents miss me and how proud they were of my success. The pressure campaign culminated at my grandmother's 80th birthday party. Susan had convinced me to attend, promising that my parents wouldn't make it about them. I should have known better. The whole extended family was there, and everyone wanted to talk about my business success. My parents stood across the room, looking wounded and hopeful. Finally, my mother approached me while I was getting cake. "Cody, please," she said, tears in her eyes. "Can we talk? I know we made mistakes, but you're still our son. The success of yours proves that everything worked out for the best." Worked out for the best? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You used art decisions as motivation to build something amazing," she continued. "Maybe this was all part of a larger plan. Maybe you needed that push to discover your true potential." I stared at her, realizing she was trying to take credit for my success. In her mind, stealing my inheritance had somehow been a favor that motivated me to achieve greatness. "Where's Tina?" I asked. "She's at school. The art program is going wonderfully. She's developed such a unique style. Her professors think she has real commercial potential." "Good for her," I said. "I'm glad my $68,000 is being put to good use." My mother's face crumpled. "Please don't say it like that. We did what we thought was best for both of you, no." I said quietly. You did what was easiest for you. Taking care of Tina's dreams was more comfortable than figuring out how to support both of your children equally. I left the party that night with a clear understanding my parents would never admit they'd done anything wrong. In their minds, they were the heroes of this story, and my success proved their decision had been correct. But I'd learned something more important. I didn't need their admission of guilt to move forward with my life. A year later, our company was acquired by a major gaming publisher for $2.3 million. My share of the acquisition was enough to buy a house, invest in new ventures, and set up a foundation for supporting young entrepreneurs from overlooked backgrounds. The local news covered the acquisition, and suddenly everyone in town knew that the kid whose family had written him off was now a millionaire before age 24. That's when the real truth came out. Tina called me directly for the first time in 3 years. She was crying before she even started signing. Cody, I need to tell you something, she began, her voice shaky. The art school thingy, it didn't work out the way everyone thought it would. She explained that the California Institute of Art Design was incredibly competitive, and despite her talent, she was struggling academically. Her professors were supportive but honest about the commercial reality of an art career. I'm probably going to graduate with a degree that leads to freelance graphic design work. She continued, maybe $40,000 a year if I'm lucky. I'll never be able to pay you back $68,000. But that wasn't the real revelation. Mom and Dad keep talking about how proud they are of your success, but they're also bitter. They're saying that you only succeeded because you wanted to spite them. Dad actually told Uncle Mike that your games are just revenge products designed to make them look bad. Revenge products? I almost laughed. My games are about finding your voice and building connections. How is that revenge? Because they prove that you didn't need them, Tina said quietly. They've spent 3 years telling everyone that stealing your inheritance was ultimately good for you, that it motivated you to succeed, but now you're more successful than they ever imagined. And they can't take credit for it anymore, she paused, wiping her eyes. Cody, I'm so sorry. I was 18 and scared about my future, and they convinced me that this was fair. I should have stood up for you. You were a kid dealing with college pressure, I said. I don't blame you for their decision, but I participated in it. I spent your money knowing it was yours. That makes me responsible too. Tina had grown up, and she was seeing our family dynamics with adult eyes for the first time. She told me about conversations she's overheard. About how her parents talked about me when I wasn't around, about their growing resentment of my success. They're telling people that you've become cold and materialistic. She said, Mom actually said that getting rich ruined your character, and that the sweet boy she raised would have forgiven them by now. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My parents hadn't just stolen my money, they'd constructed an elaborate narrative where they were the wrong parties. In their version of events, I was the ungrateful son, who's chosen money over family, who'd used their sacrifice as motivation, but then refused to share my success. They couldn't admit they'd made a mistake, because that would require acknowledging that I'd succeeded despite their betrayal. Not because of it. I never asked for an apology from my parents because I realized I didn't need one. Their inability to admit wrongdoing told me everything I needed to know about their character and priorities. Instead, I focused on building the life I wanted. Kristen and I got married 2 years after the acquisition, and we started our own game development studio, focusing on narrative-driven indie games. Danny remained my business partner and closest friend, while Derek became like the father figure I'd never really had. I established the Robert Jennings Foundation, named after my grandfather, to provide grants and mentorship for young entrepreneurs who've been overlooked by their families or communities. Every year, we help a dozen kids turn their hobby businesses into real companies. Tina and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. She transferred to a state school closer to home, changed her major to art education, and now teaches at a school for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. She loves her work and makes a decent living, though she's still paying off the debt from her expensive art school years. She visits my office sometimes, and we've developed an honest friendship built on mutual respect, rather than family obligation. She's never formally apologized for participating in the theft, but she's shown through her actions that she understands the harm it caused. My parents and I remain estranged. They still send Christmas cards and birthday messages, still tell mutual friends how much they miss me, still position themselves as the victims of their son's cold heart. I don't respond to their outreach because I've learned that some relationships are too toxic to maintain. Even with family, last month, Susan told me that my parents are facing financial difficulties. My father's construction business is struggling, and they're considering selling their house to pay off debt. She hinted that they're hoping I'll offer financial assistance. I want, not because I'm cruel or unforgiving, but because I've learned that enabling dysfunction doesn't help anyone heal. My parents made a choice to steal my inheritance, and then spent years justifying that choice, instead of making it right. Now they're facing the consequences of their financial decisions. Just like I had to face the consequences of their theft. The difference is that I used those consequences to build something better. They're still waiting for someone else to rescue them. Today, our game studio employs 15 people and has produced 8 successful titles. We're known in the industry for games that tackle emotional themes, while maintaining engaging gameplay. Players often tell us that our games help them work through their own family trauma, or find courage to pursue overlooked dreams. I'm 32 now, married to my best friend. Running a company I love, and living a life that reflects my values rather than my family's dysfunction. The $68,000 they stole was supposed to give me a foundation for my future. Instead, losing it forced me to build something much stronger, the knowledge that I could succeed entirely on my own terms. Without their support or approval, that turned out to be worth far more than the money. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my parents had been honest from the beginning, if they'd asked to borrow the money for Tina's school, or helped me figure out how both of us could pursue our dreams. We might still be a family, but then I look at the life I've built, the people I've helped through the foundation, the games that have touched millions of players worldwide, and I realize that their betrayal led me to a future more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined at 21. They stole my inheritance, but they couldn't steal my potential, and in the end, that's what really mattered. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.